Hey, what's good, y'all? It's Stinger, Carpal Tunnel Warrior, and today I'm going to be showing each and every one of you how you can make vintage soul samples from scratch. And in this video, we're going to be covering everything ranging from sound selection, chord progressions, what chord types to use, post-processing to make your loop sound vintage, all that kind of stuff. But without any further yip-yapping, the loop that we're going to be going over today sounds a little something like this. Alright, so the first thing we're going to cover with this loop is going to be sound selection. There are a couple essential sounds that you will most likely need when creating vintage soul loops. The first of which is going to be a piano. Now, I prefer to use Piano 5 from Arturia, but there's a bunch of great free options like Lab's Soft Piano and Keyzone. The second thing that you're going to need is some type of Mellotron strings. Now, I got these from Omnisphere, but you could also get them from Analog Lab, as well as any kind of Mellotron emulator. The next thing you're going to need is some kind of high string sound. Now, I'm using Xenology for this, but an amazing free option for this is going to be BBC Symphonic Orchestra. I cannot recommend that VST enough. Another thing you're going to need is going to be some type of bass. Yet again, I'm using Xenology for this, but in terms of free options, you could use ABPL by Ample Sound, or as I mentioned before, Spitfire Labs has an amazing bass sound in their library. And the final thing you're going to need is some type of drum VST. Now, I'm using Addictive Drums, yet again mentioning some free options. You could also use SSD Sampler. I used that for years and I have no complaints with it. So now that we've covered sound selection, let's get into the actual melody. And the first thing I'm going to cover in terms of the melody is going to be the piano. Now, looking at this piano melody as a whole can be a bit daunting. So I'm just going to cover this piano melody in very simple chunks. The first thing you're going to need for these melodies is going to be chords. And the chord progression we're using is the 2 to the 3 to the 1 to the 4. It's a very cluttered chord progression, but it works beautifully for these kind of melodies. Now, what we have here is just basic triads, but for soul melodies, we don't want to stick with that, which is why we're going to introduce sevenths, ninths, as well as inversions. So for this first chord, we just have a basic G minor triad playing, and I turn it into a G minor 7 by adding this F sharp right here. And if you have scale highlighting on, it's essentially just skipping a note in the scale. So it's D sharp, skip F, F sharp. And then for our A sharp minor chord right here, it may not seem like it, but we're playing an A sharp add 9. The only thing that's different about it is usually the 9 will be up here, but we inverted it and threw it down by an octave. The next chord, yet again, we play around with sevenths. It's just a basic F sharp major, skip a note, F. And then for these passing chords as well, we're using sevenths and ninths. And I wanted this final chord to be super big. So here we have our B major. We turn it into a seventh. And then we also take the fifth of our chord and put it down by an octave. This just makes the chord so much bigger than it was originally. And I want to mention for these short passing chords, all I'm doing is taking the bass notes and creating an upward stair step pattern leading into the bass note of our next chord. So here's what these chords sound like. Now, as you can tell, we still have a lot of work to do, which is where the next step of our melody comes in, which is going to be note displacement and adding in notes. So as you heard in the preview, I don't have the chord hitting on the 1. I have some nice little lead-ins leading into the chord, and I have it playing on an offbeat, which gives the melody a really nice bounce and rhythm. So offsetting your chords is something that you can do in your melodies to create more bounce. And then as well as that, I just have this little melodic run at the end of the melody. And this is basically just playing a bunch of notes within the chord while adding in some notes that reside in the scale. So this is what it sounds like with the extra notes and the chord offset. Now, you may think that our piano melody is done right there, which it very well could if we weren't going for a vintage vibe. Obviously, back in the 70s, they didn't have DAWs to pencil in their melodies. Everything was played by hand, and we want to emulate that human touch. And FL Studio has a great hidden feature for this. All we're going to do is we're going to highlight our entire melody using Control A. We're going to go next to this wrench right here, click it, go to Tools, and go to Humanize. Now, here you can play around with the start time, which is going to offset the notes by a little bit, and you can offset them to go to the right or go to the left. As well as that, you can create some variation in the duration of the notes. And I like my distribution to be on quasi-normal because I feel like that gives the most human-like sound. And then you could just play around with the seed until you find something that you like. Another thing that we're going to do to humanize this melody is yet again, we're going to select our entire melody using Control A, and we're going to hit Alt R. This is going to bring up the randomizer panel, and we're just going to randomize the velocity as well as the pan a little bit. So this is what our melody sounds like now with the randomization of the velocity and the humanization of the notes. As you can tell, some of the notes are slightly offbeat, which is exactly what we want to go for these kind of melodies. So now that we've covered the melody, let's go into the next portion, which is those mellotron strings. And all I'm doing for this is playing the chords of our piano melody. If you're having trouble building upon your melody with separate layers, an easy way to create layering is just to take aspects from your original melody and throw it on a different sound. The next thing I threw down was this electric piano, yet again just playing the chords from the previous melody. I just use this to add a deeper layer to our melody to kind of fill the frequency range. The next thing we have down is our high strings. And if you want a super easy way to get high string melodies, all you're going to do is you're going to take your bass line and put it up by 7 semitones. This is going to transpose them to the 5th of those chords, which is something that I use a lot for counter melodies, lead melodies, and high string melodies. And then you could also add in some extra notes here and there. The next thing that I laid down is the bass, and all you're going to do is copy over the original bass line from your piano melody. And don't be afraid to play around with some short staccato notes as well. And the final portion and my favorite portion of this melody is going to be the drums. Now, I used to play the drums as a kid, so I love laying down acoustic drums in my beats. And this is something that I don't really have any tips for. Just go with whatever you feel in terms of the bounce of your melody. And on top of that, be sure to humanize your drums as well. So yeah, that is every single aspect of our melody. And the final thing we're going to go over in this tutorial is going to be post-processing. And for that, I literally just have one plugin, and that is going to be Sketch Cassette. I can't recommend this plugin enough. I use it so much when making vintage style loops because there are just so many parameters to play around with. So for this, I just have it on the standard cassette, and I bring the age down by a little bit and bring the flutter up by a little bit as well. So without Sketch Cassette, this is what the melody sounds like. And with Sketch Cassette, this is what the melody sounds like. Just such a drastic difference. Really, really useful for getting that vintage sound. So yeah, with that being said, that's going to cover how to make vintage soul loops completely from scratch. I hope you learned something new in this video today. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments down below, and I will do my best to answer them. Also, consider checking out my Patreon, where I post the FLPs to all of my beats in all of my videos, including this one. So if you wanted to study the midis, the melody itself, the post-processing, all that kind of stuff, it's right at your fingertips. And finally, consider subscribing, as I post one tutorial a week and anywhere from 1 to 2 sound kits a month. Other than that, it's going to be it. Peace.